Hey guys, tonight we are forging the balance. An axe is a wedge, but a sword is a lever. We are joining the medieval swordsmith. We are going to grind solid steel into a blade that weighs 3 pounds but moves like a feather. This is a story about geometry, harmonics, and the edge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, hear the ring of the anvil, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The workshop stands at the edge of the village, where the sound of the hammer will not wake sleeping children. Stone walls, timber beams darkened by decades of smoke. The roof is low, practical, built to hold heat in winter and let sparks escape through the smoke hole in summer. This is the armory, not a blacksmith shop where horseshoes are bent and hinges are fitted. This is where weapons are born. Step inside. The door closes behind you and the world narrows to fire and iron. Your eyes adjust to the dim interior, lit only by the forge at the far end and whatever daylight filters through the narrow windows. The air is thick. You taste it before you smell it. Coal dust, hot metal, the mineral tang of flux, something ancient in the atmosphere, something that pulls at the blood. The forge burns low for now, a bed of coals glowing orange-red in the stone hearth. The swordsmith stands at his anvil, not yet working, just standing, listening. The anvil is his altar, 300 pounds of forged iron mounted on a massive oak stump sunk deep into the earth floor. The face of the anvil is smooth, polished by 10,000 hammer blows into a surface like dark glass. The horn curves away to your left, tapering to a rounded point. The hardy hole, a square socket, waits in the center of the face for tools to be fitted. Around the workshop, tools hang from pegs and nails, hammers of every size, tongs with jaws shaped for gripping round stock, square stock, flat stock, hot metal and cold, chisels, punches, files that range from coarse as a rasp to fine as silk. Against one wall stands the grindstone, a massive wheel of yellow sandstone 4 feet across, mounted in a wooden frame with a trough beneath to catch the water and the sparks. The swordsmith moves to a wooden chest in the corner, iron-bound, heavy. He lifts the lid and the hinges protest softly. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, lie the billets, not weapons, not yet, just beginnings, raw material, the compressed possibility of steel. He reaches in and withdraws a bar, perhaps 18 inches long, 2 inches wide, an inch thick. The cloth falls away and the metal catches the firelight. This is bloomery iron. Medieval Europe does not have blast furnaces yet, not the roaring giants that will come centuries later. Instead, iron is won from the earth in the bloomery, a small furnace where charcoal and iron ore are layered and burned. The result is not liquid metal that can be poured and cast. The result is the bloom, a spongy mass of iron mixed with slag, a tangle of metal and stone that must be hammered, consolidated, folded, beaten into something usable. This billet started as a bloom. Someone, perhaps the swordsmith himself, spent hours at the anvil driving out the slag, compacting the iron, creating this bar. But it is not uniform. Iron from the bloomery never is. The surface looks solid, but inside there are variations, softer pockets, harder streaks, inclusions of slag that escape the hammer. If you were to forge this directly into a sword, the blade would be unpredictable, weak spots hiding in strong, hard zones next to soft. A sword that might snap under stress or fold under impact. So the iron must be refined, homogenized, made consistent. The swordsmith sets the billet aside and reaches back into the chest. He draws out another bar, smaller, darker. This is crucible steel, imported, expensive, made far to the east in lands where they have mastered secrets Europe has not yet learned. This steel was melted in a sealed clay crucible, purified, concentrated. It is harder than the bloomery iron, holds an edge longer, but it is also more brittle. Too much and the blade will shatter. Too little and it will not hold a cutting edge. The art is in the combination. He carries both billets to the workbench and sets them down. From a drawer he takes a piece of chalk and marks the bloomery iron with a single line. Then he takes up a hacksaw, sets the teeth to the chalk line, and begins to cut. The saw whispers through the soft iron, leaving a line of metal dust on the bench. He cuts the billet into 5 pieces, each about 3 inches long. Then he takes the crucible steel and cuts it into 3 smaller sections. Now comes the fagoting. The swordsmith builds a small nest of wire on the bench, iron binding wire no thicker than string. He arranges the pieces of iron and steel in a careful stack. Bloomery iron, crucible steel, bloomery iron, crucible steel, bloomery iron. The layers alternate, hard and soft, ductile and brittle. He binds them together with the wire, wrapping it around and around until the stack is held tight. Then he twists a length of wire into a handle so he can grip the bundle with tongs. The bundle goes into the fire. He works the bellows, a leather lung mounted on the wall with a chain pull. Down, up, down, up. Air rushes into the forge and the coals brighten from red to orange to yellow-white. The heat builds. The stack of metal, visible at first, begins to glow. First a dull red, cherry red, then brighter, orange, yellow, the colors of heat, the language of the forge. You cannot measure temperature with numbers here. There are no thermometers, no pyrometers, no digital readouts. You read the color. You know what each shade means because your master taught you and his master taught him, a chain of knowledge stretching back centuries, past eye to eye, fire to fire. Dull red may be 1,000 degrees. Orange, 1,300. Yellow-white, near 2,000. And beyond that, sparking white, welding heat, the temperature at which iron becomes plastic, almost soft, where 2 pieces can be joined into one. The swordsmith watches the bundle in the fire. He knows, years of watching have taught him, the metal climbs through the colors. The wire binding begins to glow, then merge with the stack. Everything is becoming the same temperature. Equalizing, he waits. The fire roars, the bellows hiss. Down, up, down, up. Now. He seizes the bundle with long tongs, lifts it from the forge. Sparks rain down. The metal is yellow-white, radiating heat like a small sun. He crosses the workshop in 3 strides and places the bundle on the anvil face. His hammer is already in his right hand, a 4-pound forging hammer with a slightly crowned face. The handle is hickory, long enough for leverage, worn smooth by his grip. The first blow falls. The sound is not a clang, not yet. The metal is too hard, too soft. The sound is a heavy thud, almost muffled. Whumph! The hammer sinks into the glowing stack and the layers compress. Flux, sprinkled on the metal before it went into the fire, melts and runs. Borax and sand, materials that melt the oxide film on the metal's surface, allowing pure iron to contact pure iron. Second blow, whumph, the layers compress further. Third blow, fourth. He works with rhythm, not fast, not slow, steady. The hammer rises and falls. The stack flattens. The separate pieces begin to merge. Metal touches metal under pressure at welding heat, and the atoms intermingle. The boundaries dissolve. 5 pieces of iron and 3 of steel become one. The glow begins to fade. Orange now. The metal is cooling, stiffening. He returns it to the fire, buries it in the coals, works the bellows. The heat climbs again. Yellow-white. He brings it back to the anvil. The hammer falls. Whumph, whumph, whumph. The billet spreads under the blows, widening, thinning. He rotates it with the tongs, hammers from a different angle, keeps the shape roughly rectangular. This is the first welding heat. The materials are joined but not yet mixed. If you could see inside the billet, you would find layers, distinct strata of iron and steel, now bonded together but still separate. To make them truly one, to homogenize the metal, they must be folded and welded again. When the billet has been drawn out to perhaps twice its original length, the swordsmith takes a chisel from his tool rack. He heats the end of the billet, sets the chisel edge across the center, and strikes it with the hammer. The hot metal parts. He drives the chisel deeper, cutting halfway through the thickness. Then he returns the billet to the fire, heats it again to welding temperature, and uses tongs to fold it over on itself. The cut opens like a mouth, and the two halves fold together, doubling the layers. Back to the anvil. The hammer falls. Whumph, whumph, whumph. The fold welds shut. Now there are 16 layers, 8 pieces of bloomery iron, 8 pieces of crucible steel, but each layer is half as thick as before. He draws it out again, cuts it, folds it, welds it, 32 layers, draws it out, cuts it, folds it, welds it, 64 layers. Each time the layers double, they also have in thickness. By the time he has folded the billet 4 times, there are 256 layers, each too thin to see individually. The bloomery iron and crucible steel are no longer separate materials. They are alloyed, intermixed, a composite stronger and more consistent than either alone. This is pattern-welded steel. Some call it Damascus, though that is not quite accurate. True Damascus steel comes from India, made by a different process, a crucible technique Europe has not mastered. But pattern-welded steel has its own virtues. The layers create internal structure, planes of different hardness that resist crack propagation. If a crack starts in one layer, it stops or deflects at the boundary with the next. The blade becomes tougher, more resilient. The swordsmith makes one more fold, bringing the count to 512 layers, and then stops. More folds would not improve the steel, might even weaken it by introducing more welds, more chances for flaws. This is enough. The billet is now a bar of steel, no longer iron, ready to become a sword. But first, it must be forged to shape. The longsword is not a simple blade. It is an elegant structure, a study in tapers and balances. A war axe is a wedge on a stick, brutal and effective. A spear is a point on a pole, ancient and direct. But a sword, especially a longsword, is something more complex. It is a lever, balanced around a point perhaps 6 inches forward of the crossguard. The blade must be stiff enough not to flex wildly under impact, but not so stiff it becomes fragile. It must be light enough to move quickly, but heavy enough to carry momentum for powerful cuts. These requirements seem contradictory. Light but heavy, stiff but not brittle, fast but powerful. The solution is geometry. The swordsmith heats the billet and begins the rough forging. His goal now is to draw out the length, to stretch this short bar into a blade 30 inches long, perhaps 32. He works the metal at yellow heat, not quite welding temperature, hot enough to move easily under the hammer, but not so hot it sparks and loses material. The hammer falls in a steady rhythm. Ting, ting, ting. The anvil rings now, a high pure note that echoes off the stone walls. The metal is firmer, no longer the soft whumph of welding heat, but the clear ring of forging heat. He starts at one end, the end that will become the point. Light blows, close together, spreading the metal forward. The billet lengthens. He rotates it 90 degrees and hammers the other dimension, keeping the cross-section roughly rectangular. Gradually, blow by blow, inch by inch, the steel flows. It seems almost liquid under the hammer, not melting but deforming, moving, taking the shape he imposes. Every few minutes the glow fades and he returns to the fire. Heat, hammer, heat, hammer. The rhythm becomes meditative. The ring of the anvil, the hiss of the bellows, the roar of the forge. These are the sounds of creation, the oldest sounds of civilization, unchanged since humans first learned to work iron 3,000 years ago. As the blade lengthens, he begins to taper it. This is the distal taper, the reduction in thickness from hilt to point. Near the handle, where his hands will grip, and where the blade must withstand the most stress, the steel remains thick, perhaps a quarter inch. But as the blade extends toward the tip, he hammers it thinner, not uniformly, not a steady, gradual reduction. The longsword tapers in a curve, thick through the first third of the blade, where leverage is greatest, and cutting power is concentrated, then thinning more rapidly in the middle, and finally becoming quite thin near the point, perhaps 1/8 of an inch or even less. This taper serves multiple purposes. Obviously, it saves weight. A blade of uniform thickness would be far too heavy, sluggish, exhausting to wield. But the taper does more than reduce mass. It moves the balance point, the center of mass, closer to the hands. A longsword blade might be 30 inches long, but its balance point should be only 6 inches in front of the crossguard. This means the blade is front-light, maneuverable, responsive to wrist motion. You can redirect it mid-swing, recover quickly, transition from cut to thrust. The swordsmith knows this not from calculations but from feel. He has held swords, wielded them, felt how they move. He knows the difference between a blade that handles well and one that feels dead, sluggish. The knowledge lives in his hands. As the blade approaches its final length, he begins to refine the profile. The edges are still thick, almost square. The point is forming but crude. He works carefully now, heeding only small sections at a time, adjusting, correcting. The blade must be straight, not twisted, not curved. He sights down the length, checks it against a straight edge, heats and hammers any deviations. The width tapers too, though less dramatically than the thickness. At the base, near where the crossguard will be, the blade is perhaps 2 inches wide. At the tip, barely an inch. This makes the sword appear graceful, flowing like a leaf or a flame. When he is satisfied with the rough shape, he sets the blade aside to cool. It rests on a rack, slowly releasing its heat to the air. The steel contracts slightly as it cools, locking in the shape. Tomorrow it will go back to the fire for the next stage, but for now, the forging is done. The blade that rests on the rack does not look like a sword yet. The edges are thick and rounded. The surface is rough, covered with black scale, the iron oxide that forms on hot steel exposed to air. It looks crude, primitive, like something a barbarian might carry. But the bones are there. The length, the taper, the balance. Now comes the fuller. Many people call it the blood groove, believing it channels blood away from a wound to make the blade more lethal. This is nonsense, a myth perpetuated by imagination. Blood is the least of concerns in a sword fight. The fuller has nothing to do with blood. It has everything to do with physics. A sword blade must be stiff. When you strike, the blade must not flex excessively, or it will deflect away from the target, wasting energy. But stiffness depends on thickness. A thick blade is stiff but heavy. A thin blade is light but flexible. The fuller solves this problem. Imagine an I-beam, the kind used in construction. A solid bar of steel is heavy and expensive. An I-beam, with material concentrated in the top and bottom flanges, and only a thin web connecting them, uses far less steel, but provides nearly the same stiffness. The material is farther from the neutral axis, the imaginary line running down the center of the beam, and material farther from the neutral axis contributes more to stiffness. The fuller does the same thing for a sword blade. By removing material from the center, by cutting a groove down the middle of the flat, you create two ridges of thicker steel on either side. The blade becomes an I-beam lying on its side. You remove weight without losing stiffness. In fact, for the same weight, a fullered blade is stiffer than a flat blade. The swordsmith begins by heating a section of the blade near the base. When it glows orange-red, he fits a fullering tool into the hardy hole on his anvil. The fuller is a rounded bar of hard steel, perhaps half an inch in diameter, mounted on a shank that fits the square hole. It stands vertically from the anvil face like a small fence post. He positions the hot blade across the fuller, flat side down, centered carefully. Then he takes up his hammer and strikes the blade directly above the fuller. The hot steel deforms around the rounded tool, creating a groove. He strikes again and again, working his way along the length of the blade. The fuller pushes up into the metal from below while the hammer drives down from above, and between them the groove forms. It must be centered. If the fuller wanders off to one side, the blade will be unbalanced, weak on one edge. The swordsmith works by eye, by feel, checking constantly, adjusting. The groove is shallow at first, barely a depression. He makes a second pass, reheating and fullering again, deepening it. Then a third pass. The fuller runs down the center of the blade from about 2 inches below the crossguard to perhaps 6 inches from the tip. It does not extend the full length because near the point, the blade is already quite thin, and a fuller there would weaken rather than strengthen it. When the fullering is complete on one side, he flips the blade and fullers the other. The grooves must match, must be symmetrical, or the blade will be unbalanced. This requires skill, precision, and eye trained by years of work. Some swordsmiths use a different method. Instead of the bottom fuller and hammer, they use a fullering swage, a tool that clamps over the blade from both sides with matching grooves that press the fuller into the steel. This is faster, more consistent, but requires expensive tools. The swordsmith uses the traditional method, the hammer and hardy fuller, because it is what he knows, what his master taught him. After fullering, the blade looks closer to its final form. The groove catches the light, a dark channel running down the center of the flat. The ridges on either side stand proud, giving the blade depth, dimension. But the surface is still rough, still covered in scale, and the edges are still thick and blunt. Now comes the grinding. In the corner of the workshop stands the yellow wheel, the great grindstone. It is a massive disk of sandstone, quarried from the hills to the north where the yellow rock is found. 4 feet across, 6 inches thick, it weighs perhaps 500 pounds. It is mounted horizontally on a wooden frame, with a crank handle to turn it and a trough of water beneath. The swordsmith mounts the blade in a wooden fixture that holds it at the correct angle, edge down toward the wheel. The geometry of the grind is critical. A longsword has a lenticular cross-section, a flattened diamond shape. From the thick central ridge left by the fuller, the steel slopes down toward each edge, thinning gradually. The angle is shallow, perhaps 10 or 12 degrees from the center line to the edge. This creates a long, gradual bevel that is strong but still keen enough to cut. He positions the fixture and begins to turn the crank. The great stone wheel rotates slowly, ponderously. Water from the trough splashes onto the surface, keeping it wet. He lowers the blade until it contacts the stone. The sound is a hiss. S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. Not the ring of the anvil, not the roar of the forge. A whisper. The stone abrades the steel, tearing away tiny particles with each revolution. Sparks fly, bright yellow points of light that arc away into the shadows. These are not really sparks in the sense of burning embers. They are particles of iron oxide, heated by friction until they glow. Yellow sparks mean good steel, iron with a bit of carbon. White sparks would indicate too much carbon, brittle steel. Red sparks would mean wrought iron, too soft. The swordsmith watches the yellow shower and knows his steel is good. He grinds slowly, methodically. The stone removes material gradually. Too much pressure and the steel overheats, turns blue, loses its hardness. Too little and the work takes forever. He finds the balance, letting the stone do the work, keeping the blade moving so no one spot overheats. The water on the stone hisses into steam. The slurry of water and stone and metal runs off the wheel and collects in the trough. The blade begins to reveal itself. Where the scale is ground away, bright steel appears, gray and smooth. The bevel forms, a long, flat plane running from the fuller down to the edge. He works one side of the blade, then the other, keeping the bevels symmetrical. The edge is still thick, perhaps a 1/16 of an inch, far too thick to cut. But that will come later. For now, he establishes the geometry, the angles, the flow of the blade from center to edge. Hours pass. The wheel turns. The blade slowly transforms. The rough forged surface becomes smooth ground steel. The proportions emerge. The fuller appears as a deliberate channel rather than a crude groove. The bevels catch the light, reflecting like mirrors. Grinding is meditative work, repetitive, precise. The hiss of the stone, the splash of water, the soft ringing scrape as the blade vibrates against the wheel. The swordsmith's mind empties. There is only the blade, the stone, the slow revelation of form from rough steel. When both sides are ground and the bevels are even, he removes the blade from the fixture and examines it closely. He sights down the length, checking for straightness. He runs his thumb carefully down the flat, feeling for low spots or irregularities. He holds it up to the window, letting light glance off the bevels, looking for flat spots or ripples. Small imperfections remain. Here the bevel is slightly low. There a scratch crosses the flat. He returns the blade to the stone, makes corrections, grinds away the flaws. The process is iterative. Grind, check, grind again. Slowly, through repetition and attention, the blade approaches perfection. The edges are still thick, deliberately so. A thin edge would be damaged by the grinding process, would overheat easily, might even crumble under the pressure of the stone. So he leaves them thick for now, safe, protected. The final edge will come later, on finer stones, with files and whetstones, after the blade has been hardened and tempered. But the profile is nearly complete. The blade is 30 inches long, tapering from 2 inches wide at the base to an inch at the point. The distal taper runs from a 1/4 inch thick near the hilt to less than an eighth at the tip. The fuller runs down the center, flanked by proud ridges, and from those ridges the bevels slope gracefully down to edges that are still blunt, but which promise sharpness to come. The swordsmith sets the blade on his workbench and steps back. The steel gleams in the light from the forge, gray and smooth, beautiful in its simplicity. It is not yet a weapon. The edge does not cut. The point is not sharp. The steel is soft, unhardened, scarcely stronger than iron, but the form is there. The geometry, the balance. He picks it up, holds it by the tang, the unfinished portion that will fit inside the grip. Despite its length, it feels light. The balance point is just above his hand. He moves it through the air and it responds instantly, cutting invisible arcs, flowing from position to position. The weight is in his hand, not out at the tip. The blade is an extension of his arm, not a burden to be wielded. This is what all the work has been for: the selecting and stacking of the steel, the folding and welding to homogenize it, the careful forging of the distal taper, the fullering to lighten it without weakening it, the grinding to create the bevels. Every step has contributed to this moment, to this balance, to this feel. An axe is a wedge, mass concentrated in a heavy head, designed to split wood or bone through simple mechanical advantage. You swing an axe with your whole body, committing to the blow. It is powerful but predictable. A sword is a lever, a blade that pivots around your hands, multiplying speed, allowing feints and redirects. You control a sword with subtle wrist movements, with shifts of weight, with geometry. It is faster, more versatile, more complex. And the longsword is the ultimate expression of this principle, long enough to generate devastating cuts, balanced enough to change direction instantly, light enough to wield for minutes at a time in combat, stiff enough to thrust through mail, sharp enough to cut flesh and cloth. But it is not finished. The steel is still soft, in its annealed state, the state it takes when cooled slowly from forging heat. It can be cut with a file bent with moderate force. It would fail in combat, bending, or chipping. To become a true weapon, it must be hardened. Hardening is transformation. You heat the steel until it glows cherry red, until the crystal structure rearranges itself into a form called austenite, where carbon atoms dissolve between iron atoms in a regular pattern. Then you cool it rapidly, shocking it by plunging it into liquid. The carbon atoms become trapped, locked in place before they can rearrange themselves. The steel transforms into martensite, a hard, brittle structure. The blade becomes hard enough to scratch glass, to hold an edge through dozens of cuts. But martensite is too brittle. A fully hardened blade would shatter if struck against armor. So after hardening comes tempering, a gentle reheating that allows some of the internal stress to relax, that permits a bit of ductility to return. The blade loses some hardness, but gains toughness. It can flex slightly without breaking, can absorb impacts without fracturing. The balance between hardness and toughness is the final secret of the swordsmith. Too hard and the blade shatters. Too soft and it dulls or bends. The correct temper, the perfect balance, is what separates a master from a journeyman. But that is still to come. Tomorrow the blade will go back into the fire for hardening. The day after, tempering. Then the final sharpening on fine whetstones, the fitting of the crossguard and grip and pommel, the polishing and finishing. For now, the blade rests on the bench, a length of shaped steel, a promise of what it will become. The swordsmith covers it with an old cloth to protect it from rust overnight. He banks the forge, damping down the coals so they will hold heat until morning. He hangs his tools on their pegs, sweeps metal filings from the floor, pours the slurry from the grinding trough into a waste bucket. The light fades. The workshop grows dim. The anvil stands silent, waiting for tomorrow's hammer. The yellow wheel rests, patient, ready to turn again. The smell of hot metal and coal hangs in the air, a memory of the day's work. Outside, the village settles into evening. Somewhere a dog barks. Voices carry on the cooling air. But inside the armory, there is only quiet, only the faint tick of cooling steel, only the presence of the unfinished blade. The swordsmith pauses at the door, looks back at the bench where the blade lies hidden beneath its cloth. Tomorrow it will be transformed. Tomorrow it will become hard, dangerous, deadly. But tonight it is just steel, shaped but not finished, potential but not realized. He steps out into the dusk and closes the door behind him. The lock clicks. The armory holds its breath, waiting for morning, waiting for fire, waiting for the next stage of creation. Morning comes with mist. The swordsmith enters the armory before the sun clears the rooftops, before the village fully wakes. The door closes behind him, and he stands for a moment in the dim interior, letting his eyes adjust. The smell of cold forge, of metal and dust and old smoke. The blade waits on the bench under its old cloth. Today is the most dangerous day. Heat treatment is transformation and risk combined. The blade has been forged, shaped, ground. All that work, all those hours, hang in the balance of the next few minutes. If the heating is uneven, if the quench goes wrong, if the steel cracks or warps, everything is lost. You cannot unbreak a broken blade. You cannot straighten a badly warped one, not after it has been hardened. The steel becomes too rigid, too brittle. Force it and it snaps. The swordsmith has broken blades before. Every smith has. You learn from the failures, learn to read the steel, learn the margins between success and disaster. But the knowledge does not make it easier. Each blade represents days of work. Each one is a small piece of your life committed to metal. He uncovers the blade and examines it in the growing light. Runs his hand down the flat, checking one more time for flaws, for rough spots that might become stress concentrations. Sights down the length, confirming it is straight. A blade that enters the quench curved will emerge more curved, the distortion amplified by the violent transformation of the steel. Satisfied, he sets it aside and turns to the forge. Today he will not use the standard hearth. For heat treatment, he needs even heat along the entire length of the blade, and the open forge, with its concentrated hot spot in the center and cooler edges, will not suffice. Instead, he has built a special trough. It stands against the wall, a long, narrow box made of fire brick, 3 feet long, 8 inches wide, 6 inches deep. He has filled it with charcoal, layer upon layer of good hardwood charcoal broken into small pieces. At each end of the trough, a pipe leads to a bellows, so he can blow air evenly along the entire length. He lights the charcoal with coals carried from the banked forge, feeding the flames until they catch and spread. Then he works both bellows, left hand, right hand, alternating pulls, sending air into both ends of the trough. The charcoal ignites, glowing red, then orange. The heat builds evenly, a long bed of fire perfectly sized for a sword blade. While the trough heats, he prepares the quenching tank. It is a long wooden trough, similar in dimensions to the charcoal trough but deeper and lined with metal. He fills it with oil, not water. Water quenches too violently, creates too much stress, causes cracking. Oil is gentler, cooling the steel rapidly enough to harden it, but not so fast that it shatters. The oil is old, used many times before, darkened with dissolved carbon and scale. This is good. Fresh oil can ignite when hot steel is plunged into it, creating flames and smoke. Old oil, seasoned oil, quenches more calmly. The charcoal bed is ready now, glowing orange along its entire length, radiating heat that you can feel from 6 feet away. The swordsmith takes up the blade by its tang, holding it with a special pair of long tongs that grip only the unfinished portion, leaving the blade itself free. He positions the blade horizontally above the charcoal trough, suspended in the heat. The steel begins to warm. First, the color does not change, the metal simply drinking in heat. Then a faint darkening, a deep purple that is almost black. Then brown. Then the colors begin. Pale yellow, called straw, darker yellow. Brown again, but brighter, purple, blue. And finally, at cherry red, the color he needs, the color that indicates austenite transformation, the crystal structure rearranging itself to accept carbon into solution. But he cannot simply heat one spot. The entire blade must reach the critical temperature simultaneously. If the tip is red while the base is still brown, the quench will be uneven. So he moves the blade slowly back and forth above the charcoal bed, raising and lowering it slightly, letting heat soak evenly into the steel. His eyes constantly scan the length, reading the colors, adjusting. Minutes pass. The blade glows brighter, cherry red near the base, cherry red in the middle, cherry red at the tip. He watches, waits, ensures the color is uniform. The fuller, being thicker, holds more heat. The edges, being thinner, heat faster. He must account for this, must keep the blade moving, equalizing. The workshop is silent, except for the soft roar of the charcoal and the hiss of the bellows. Sweat runs down his face. The radiant heat from the trough is intense, like standing too close to a bonfire. His hands ache from holding the tongs, from the weight of the blade suspended at arm's length. Now, he lifts the blade from the trough, crosses the workshop in 2 quick strides, and plunges the glowing steel into the oil. The sound is a violent hiss, a roar as if the oil itself is screaming. Vapor boils from the surface in a cloud. The blade, cherry red a moment ago, darkens instantly. The transformation happens faster than thought. The austenite, with no time to rearrange itself back into soft ferrite and cementite, is frozen in place, distorted, forced into the strained crystal structure of martensite. The swordsmith holds the blade deep in the oil, moving it slightly, keeping it straight. This is the critical moment. As the steel cools, it contracts. Different parts cool at different rates. The thicker sections hold heat longer, stresses build. If the blade is not perfectly straight going in, if the heat was not perfectly even, if the internal structure has weak spots or inclusions, it will warp now. Curve, bend, twist. He watches through the roiling vapor. The blade is invisible beneath the surface, but he can feel it through the tongs. He feels for the vibration of cracking, for the sudden shift that would indicate warping. Nothing. The hissing continues. The oil boils. Slowly, the violence subsides. The temperature differential decreases. The blade approaches the temperature of the oil. The vapor decreases. The hissing quiets. He waits, still holding the blade submerged, letting it cool completely. When the oil is calm, he slowly withdraws the blade. It emerges dark, coated with oil, dull gray where it is not black with oxide. He sets it on the bench and immediately examines it, takes up a straight edge, lays it along the flat, sights down the edge. His heart is in his throat. Straight. The blade is straight. No curve, no twist. The quench has succeeded. He releases a breath he did not know he was holding. The hardest part is done, but he cannot relax yet. The blade is now in its most dangerous state. Fully hardened, martensitic, glass hard and glass brittle. If dropped, it might shatter. If struck, it could crack. It must be tempered immediately, brought back from the edge of brittleness, given toughness to match its hardness. He cleans the blade with a rag, wiping away the oil and loose scale, exposing bare metal. Then he takes a piece of fine sandstone and polishes a small section near the tang, creating a bright mirror-like surface. This will serve as his temperature indicator. The blade goes back over the charcoal trough, but this time he keeps it farther from the heat, in the cooler air above the coals. He's not trying to reach red heat again. He is trying to reach tempering temperature, much lower, down in the range where color changes happen not in the steel itself, but in the thin oxide film that forms on the polished surface. He watches the polished section. At first, nothing. The steel is cold, reflective. Then, as heat soaks in, a pale yellow appears on the polished surface. Straw yellow. This is the color of light tempering, suitable for chisels and files, tools that must be very hard. The yellow deepens to gold, then to brown. This is medium tempering for punches and axes, tools that need hardness but also toughness. The brown shifts to purple, then to blue. This is the color he wants. Blue tempering, drawn to approximately 500 degrees, gives the right balance for a sword blade. Hard enough to hold an edge through many cuts, tough enough to flex slightly under impact without fracturing. When the blue spreads along the entire length of the blade, even and consistent, he removes it from the heat and lets it air cool. There is no quench this time. Tempering does not require rapid cooling. The blade cools slowly on the bench, the blue oxide film darkening to a deep navy. The steel is now complete, hardened and tempered. The edge will hold sharpness. The blade will flex slightly under stress and return to true. It will not shatter if struck against armor. It is ready to be finished. But first the blade must have furniture. The crossguard, the grip, the pommel. These are not decoration. They are essential components, structural elements that protect the hand, provide control, and balance the weapon. The swordsmith sets the blade aside and returns to the forge. He takes a bar of mild iron from his stock, a piece about 8 inches long, an inch and a half square. This will become the crossguard. Mild iron, not steel. The guard does not need to be hard. It needs to be tough, ductile, able to absorb impacts without cracking. Mild iron is perfect for this. He heats the bar to orange and begins forging. The goal is to create a roughly cylindrical piece, perhaps 6 inches long and an inch and a quarter in diameter, with a square hole through the center to accept the blade's tang. First, he draws out the length, thinning the bar. Then he uses a rounding hammer to work the square cross-section into a rough cylinder. The hammer falls in a rhythmic pattern, rotating the workpiece a quarter turn between blows. Ting, rotate, ting, rotate. The corners of the square are hammered down, the faces bulge outward, and gradually the shape becomes octagonal, then 16-sided, then round. When the basic cylinder is formed, he uses a punch to begin creating the hole. He heats the center section to yellow heat and places the bar on the anvil with a punching plate beneath it, a piece of steel with a round hole in the center. Then he takes a tapered punch, sets its point on the center of the bar, and strikes it with the hammer. The punch drives into the hot iron, creating a depression. He flips the bar, heats again, and punches from the other side. The depressions deepen, meeting in the middle. More heating, more punching. The hole grows. He switches to a larger punch, driving it through, enlarging the opening. When the hole is nearly the right size, he takes a drift, a tapered square mandrel, and drives it through the hole. The drift forces the opening into a square shape and enlarges it to the exact dimensions of the blade's tang. But the tang is not perfectly square. It tapers slightly, narrowing toward the tip. and the junction between blade and tang has shoulders where the blade is wider than the tang. The hole in the guard must accommodate this geometry, must fit snugly against the shoulders so the guard cannot slide or rotate. This requires filing, careful, tedious filing. He mounts the guard in a vise and takes up a square file. The sound is a rasp, a dry metallic scraping. He files one side of the hole, checking the fit frequently by sliding the tang through. Too tight, more filing. Check again, still too tight, file more. The pile of iron filings grows on the workbench, grey and curly. Slowly, the fit improves. The tang begins to slide through more easily, but it must not be loose. A loose guard will rattle, will shift in combat, will fail to protect the hand. The fit must be perfect, snug enough that the guard requires firm pressure to slide onto the tang, but not so tight that it requires hammering. He files, checks, files again. Hours pass. The file rasps. The pile of filings grows. His hands cramp from gripping the file, from the constant back and forth motion, but he does not hurry. This is finish work, precision work. A sloppy fit here will ruin the entire sword. When he is satisfied, he slides the guard onto the tang until it seats against the shoulders where the blade widens. Perfect. Firm but not forced. The guard cannot rotate, cannot slide. The blade now has its first piece of furniture, the iron crossbar that will protect his hand from an opponent's blade sliding down toward the grip. Next comes the grip itself. The handle of a longsword is not wrapped around the tang. The tang is too narrow, too sharp-edged, uncomfortable to hold. Instead, the grip is built up around the tang, creating a cylinder of comfortable diameter, usually about 1.25 inches, long enough for two hands, typically 10 to 12 inches. He selects two pieces of wood from his stock, beech, tight-grained and strong. Each piece has been split and planed to a rough half-cylinder shape. He lays them on the workbench and positions the blade's tang between them, marking where the tang falls. With chisel and mallet, he cuts a channel down the center of each piece, a groove that will accept the tang. The groove must be precise, must match the taper and width of the tang exactly. Too shallow and the wood will not close around the tang. Too deep and there will be gaps, weak spots. He works carefully, testing the fit repeatedly. The chisel shaves away thin ribbons of pale wood. The channel deepens. When both pieces have been fitted, he coats the channels with hide glue, thick and sticky, boiled from animal skins and hooves. Then he places the tang in one channel, sets the other piece on top, and wraps the whole assembly tightly with cord, binding the wood pieces together around the tang. The glue will dry overnight, but for now, the bound grip is firm enough to work with. He unwraps the cord and begins shaping the wood. First with a spoke shave, a small plane with a curved sole, he rounds the square corners, creating an octagonal cross-section. Then with a rasp, he refines the octagon into a smooth cylinder, tapering it slightly toward the pommel end for a more comfortable grip. The wood is sanded smooth with progressively finer abrasives. Coarse sandstone first, removing tool marks, then finer stone, then a piece of sharkskin, nature's sandpaper, incredibly fine and even. The wood becomes smooth as glass, pleasant to touch. But wood alone is not sufficient. In combat, hands sweat. Wet wood is slippery, dangerous. The grip needs texture. He takes a length of waxed linen cord, perhaps 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and begins wrapping it around the wooden grip. The wraps are tight, each turn lying snug against the previous one, no gaps. He starts at the guard and spirals down toward the pommel end, pulling the cord taut with each wrap. The pattern is simple, functional, not decorative, just practical. The cord provides texture, prevents slipping. When the cord wrapping is complete, he ties it off and trims the end. The grip now has a slightly rough surface, easier to hold. But cord alone will wear and fray. It needs protection. From a bucket of water, he pulls a strip of leather that has been soaking overnight. Thick leather from the back of a cow, stiff when dry but now soft and pliable. He wraps this over the cord, starting again at the guard, spiraling down in the same direction. The wet leather stretches, conforming to the cord beneath. He pulls it tight, overlapping each turn slightly, and when he reaches the end, he tacks it in place with a small brass nail. As the leather dries, it will shrink, tightening around the cord and wood, creating a grip that is firm, comfortable, and durable. The texture of the leather combined with the raised spirals of the cord beneath provides excellent traction even with wet hands. The sword now has a guard and a grip, but it is still unbalanced. A longsword blade 30 inches long, even with the distal taper and fuller to reduce weight, is still nose-heavy. The center of mass falls too far forward, out near the midpoint of the blade. Such a sword would feel sluggish, exhausting to wield. The arm would tire quickly. Cuts would be powerful but slow. Recovery after a miss would be delayed. The solution is the pommel. A heavy weight at the base of the grip, counterbalancing the blade, pulling the center of mass back toward the hand. The pommel is not an afterthought. It is an essential component of the sword's dynamics. Change the weight of the pommel, and you change how the sword moves, how it feels, how it fights. The swordsmith takes a disc of iron, perhaps 3 inches in diameter and an inch thick. It weighs maybe a pound, perhaps a bit more. He has forged it previously, shaped it roughly, drilled a square hole through the center. Now he refines it. He files the faces flat and parallel, files the edge round and smooth, enlarges and shapes the square hole to fit the end of the tang. The file rasps. Iron dust falls. The pommel slowly takes its final form, a simple wheel shape, heavy and solid. When the pommel fits loosely on the tang, he assembles the complete sword. Guard seated against the blade's shoulders, grip in place. Pommel slid onto the end of the tang, leaving perhaps a 1/4 inch of the tang protruding beyond. Now comes the final step, the one that locks everything together permanently. Cleaning. The tang protrudes beyond the pommel, a square projection of steel perhaps a 1/4 inch long. The swordsmith files the edges of this projection, chamfering them slightly so they will not crack when upset. Then he positions the sword pommel down in a special fixture that holds it vertically, blade pointing up. He takes a small hammer, a riveting hammer with a slightly rounded face, and begins to strike the end of the tang. Not hard, not the ringing blows of forging, soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. The tang, being softer than the blade, deforms under the hammer. The end spreads, mushrooming outward. The metal flows radially, widening. Tap, tap, tap. He works around the edge, rotating the hammer, keeping the expansion even. The tang spreads. The mushroomed end grows wider than the hole in the pommel. The metal flows over the face of the pommel like wax from a candle, creating a rivet head. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is soft, almost musical. A gentle tinging, metal on metal, but quiet, controlled. As the tang spreads, it pulls the pommel tight against the grip, and the grip tight against the guard, and the guard tight against the blade's shoulders. The entire assembly compresses, becomes one piece. The sword is no longer separate components. It is unified, locked together by the peened tang. He continues tapping until the rivet head is smooth and round, flush with the sides of the pommel, impossible to pull off without cutting. Then he files the rivet head smooth, blending it into the pommel's surface. The sword is complete, structurally finished, but it is not yet beautiful. He takes the sword to the grinding wheel and carefully refines the blade surfaces. The yellow stone, wet with water, hisses as he touches the bevels to it, polishing away the dark oxide from the tempering, revealing bright steel beneath. He works carefully, lightly, not removing significant material, just polishing. The bevels become smooth, reflective. The fuller is cleaned and polished. The flats are brought to a soft gleam. He switches to finer stones. A hard Arkansas stone, gray and dense, brings the polish higher. Then a leather strop charged with fine abrasive compound, creating a mirror finish on the bevels. The edge remains blunt, deliberately left thick during grinding. Now he addresses it. He mounts the blade in a fixture and takes up a fine file, a single-cut file with teeth so fine they are barely visible. The file whispers along the edge, creating the primary bevel, thinning the metal down to perhaps the thickness of a coin edge. Then he switches to whetstones. A medium stone first, establishing the edge angle, perhaps 20 degrees inclusive. The stone rings softly against the steel as he sweeps it along the edge, holding the angle consistent by feel. Steel dust mixed with water forms a grey slurry on the stone. He wipes it away, rinses the stone, continues. A finer stone next, refining the edge, removing the scratches left by the previous stone, polishing the bevel. The edge is taking shape now, growing sharper, thinner. Finally, a very fine stone, hard and smooth, the kind used for finishing razors. This stone barely cuts, mainly polishes. He works it along the edge with light pressure, creating a keen, sharp edge. Not razor sharp. A sword edge is slightly thicker than a razor, less fragile, better able to withstand the impacts of cutting bone and armor, but sharp enough to slice cloth or flesh with ease. He tests the edge by carefully shaving a few hairs from his forearm. The blade cuts them cleanly, effortlessly, sharp enough. The guard and pommel are cleaned and polished. The leather-wrapped grip is treated with oil, darkening it, protecting it. The entire sword is wiped down with an oiled cloth, a thin film of oil that will protect the steel from rust. Now balance. He holds the sword horizontally, supported on one finger beneath the grip, about 6 inches forward of the guard. The blade should balance here, level and stable. If it tips forward, the pommel is too light. If it tips back, the pommel is too heavy. He adjusts his finger slightly, searching for the exact balance point. There, 6 inches from the guard. Perfect. The sword is nose-light, maneuverable, responsive. He holds the grip properly now, one hand on the handle, the other ready to join it for powerful two-handed cuts. He moves the blade through the air, cutting invisible targets. The sword flows like water, changing direction instantly, recovering from cuts, transitioning from high guard to low, from thrust to cut. The weight is in his hands, not fighting him. The blade is an extension of his intention. This is what all the work has created, not just a sharp edge and a point. Those are merely the end result. What matters is the balance, the handling, the way the sword moves. Geometry translated into motion, physics made tangible. He sets the sword on the workbench and builds its sheath. 2 thin boards of poplar, carved with a shallow groove on their inner faces to accept the blade. The boards are glued together with the blade between them, clamped tightly until the glue sets. When dry, the wooden core is shaped and sanded smooth. Then it is covered with leather, wet leather wrapped tightly and sewn along the back seam. As it dries, it shrinks, creating a tight, durable covering. A bronze chape is fitted to the tip, a metal cap that protects the end of the sheath from wear. A bronze throat is fitted to the opening, reinforcing it, preventing the sharp edge from cutting the wood. A belt loop is sewn to the leather, allowing the sheath to be worn at the side. The sword slides into the sheath with a soft whisper of steel on wood, a satisfying sound, the sound of completion. The swordsmith stands in the quiet armory, the finished sword in his hands. Outside, the sun is setting. The day's work is done. From raw steel to finished weapon, the transformation is complete. He hangs the sheathed sword on the wall with others he has made. Tomorrow, someone will come to claim it. A knight or a man-at-arms, someone who has commissioned this blade and waited weeks for its completion. They will pay in silver, a sum that represents months of wages for a common laborer. They will take the sword and carry it into battle, trust their life to its edge and balance. But tonight the sword rests. The armory is silent. The forge is banked. The anvil stands quiet. The yellow wheel is still. The hammers hang on their pegs. The files rest in their racks. Tools of creation, sleeping until tomorrow's work begins. The sword gleams in the fading light, steel catching the last rays of sun through the window. The fuller runs down the center, a shadow within brightness. The bevels reflect like mirrors, the edge invisible, sharp enough to part falling silk. The balance perfect, the weight distributed precisely. 30 inches of steel, 3 pounds of metal, but it moves like a feather, like thought itself. This is the art. Not just the forging and grinding, though those are essential. Not just the hardening and tempering, though without them there would be no sword. The art is in the balance, in understanding that a sword is not a club or an axe. It is a lever, a tool of geometry and physics, an extension of the human arm designed to amplify speed and control. The longsword represents the pinnacle of this understanding. Too short and it lacks reach and leverage. Too long and it becomes unwieldy. Too heavy and it exhausts the wielder. Too light and it lacks authority. The longsword, typically 30 to 32 inches of blade with a grip for 2 hands, finds the balance point where all these factors converge. Long enough to outreach shorter weapons. Light enough to wield with speed. Heavy enough to cut through resistance. Balanced to turn on a coin. And every detail contributes. The distal taper, making the blade thinner toward the tip, concentrates mass near the hand where it can be controlled. The fuller, removing weight from the center while maintaining stiffness, allows the blade to be longer without becoming too heavy. The pommel, counterbalancing the blade, pulls the pivot point back to where the hands grip, making the weapon maneuverable despite its length. Even the grip length is carefully considered. 10 to 12 inches, long enough for 2 hands, but not so long it becomes awkward. This allows powerful two-handed cuts when needed, but also permits single-handed use in close quarters, the offhand free to grapple or draw a dagger. The swordsmith knows these things not from books or theories, but from experience, from holding swords, feeling how they move, understanding what makes one blade alive in the hand and another dead and sluggish. This knowledge, accumulated over years of apprenticeship and practice, guides every decision. How thick to leave the tang, where to place the fuller, how much distal taper, what weight for the pommel. It is knowledge that cannot be written down, not entirely. You can describe the process, explain the steps, but the feel, the judgment, the moment when you know the blade is right, that comes only from experience. The light fades, the armory grows dark. The sword hangs on the wall, waiting. Tomorrow it will be taken up, worn, used. It will cut and thrust, parry and bind. It will ring against other blades, bite into shields, perhaps save its owner's life or take an enemy's. It will serve its purpose. But tonight it is at rest. The steel is balanced. The edge is sharp. The point is true. The grip is comfortable. The balance is perfect. Everything is as it should be. The village beyond the armory walls settles into sleep. Fires are banked. Doors are barred. Children are tucked into beds. Sentries walk the walls, looking out into the dark. The world is quiet. In the armory, the sword hangs in shadow. The blade does not reflect anymore, with no light to catch. But it is there, solid and real. Steel forged from bloom iron and crucible steel, folded and welded into homogeneity. Shaped by hammer and anvil into its long, tapering form. Fullered for stiffness without weight. Ground to create bevels that flow from thick to thin. Hardened in oil to transform soft iron into hard steel. Tempered to blue for toughness. Sharpened on stones to keenness. Fitted with guard and grip and pommel, balanced on a finger, sheathed in wood and leather. Complete. The night deepens. Stars emerge overhead, visible through the smoke hole in the roof. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, then falls silent. A breeze moves through the village, carrying the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. Life continues. ordinary and peaceful. The sword does not care about these things. It is a tool, an object metal shaped by human hands for human purposes. It has no thoughts, no feelings, no awareness, but it has presence. It occupies space. It waits with the patience of steel, ready for whatever comes. You are safe. The armory protects you. Stone walls thick and strong, heavy timber door barred from within. The forge is banked but not cold, coals holding warmth through the night. The anvil stands guard, 300 pounds of solid iron, unmovable, eternal. The hammers hang ready. The files and stones wait in their racks. Tools of creation, but also tools of defense, should they ever be needed. The sword on the wall is there for you. If danger comes, if the night brings threats, the blade is ready, sharp and balanced, strong and true, hardened and tempered. A weapon, yes, but also a guardian. Steel standing watch while you rest. But there is no danger tonight. The village is quiet. The sentries are vigilant. The walls are strong. Peace holds. The world, for this moment, is safe. Sleep. The sword rests on the wall. The blade gleams faintly in starlight filtering through the smoke hole. The fuller is a shadow. The edge is invisible. The grip is wrapped in leather, dark and soft. The pommel is heavy, solid, the counterweight that makes everything balance. The guard crosses the blade, protecting, separating steel from hand. Everything is in its place. Every component serves its purpose. Every angle is calculated. Every curve is intentional. The sword is not decoration. It is not art for art's sake. It is function made elegant through necessity. And you can rest knowing it is there. Not because you need it, but because it exists. Because someone spent days creating it, fold by fold, blow by blow, spark by spark. Because the swordsmith understood balance and geometry and the properties of steel. Because knowledge was passed down through generations, master to apprentice, hand to hand, forge to forge. The anvil rings in memory. Ting, ting, ting. The sound fades into silence. The grindstone hisses in memory. Shhhhhh. The sound fades into silence. The quench roars in memory. Hiss. The sound fades into silence. Only quiet remains. Only darkness. Only rest. The sword hangs on the wall. You are safe. The night is peaceful. The steel is patient. The edge is sharp. The balance is perfect. Sleep now. Let the rhythm of the hammer fade from your mind. Let the hiss of the grindstone quiet. Let the roar of the forge diminish. Let the metallic ring of steel on steel soften into memory. The armory protects. The blade guards. The balance holds. Everything is as it should be. Rest.